Hey everybody, welcome to Battleground. Today I've got a great guest. His name is Daniel Turner. Daniel Turner is just an amazing guy. He's the founder and CEO of Power of the Future. And if you know me, if you paid attention to my campaigns, both for Congress and the Senate, then you know what a true believer that I am in American energy independence, but not just independence, energy dominance. It's critically important for a litany of different reasons. Daniel is a guy that understands that, and we are honored to have him with us today. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be on with you, Sean. I really am. I'm grateful to be with you. I've followed you for a very long time, so to be on your program is kind of an honor, so thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. And like I said, like your Twitter, like you're a pipe hitter when it comes to this stuff. You pull no punches. And I mean, I want to dive into all this stuff, but one of the things that you do and you do so well is I think you understand the underpinnings of what the radical green movement is all about. And that it's not about, protecting the climate. It's not about, regulating a proper global temperature. It's rooted in control and I think ultimately communism. And so can we start there? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I've been saying these things for a while, and sometimes people think you're crazy when you say this. But then in the last couple of years, something amazing happened that Americans and people worldwide experienced. And it's a perfect analogy, as tragic as it is. It's a perfect analogy of what the Greens have been trying to do for decades. And that thing is COVID. And under the guise of public health, you suddenly saw the state step in with tremendous abuse of power, with exceptions for the elite. The way John Kerry gets to fly his private jet is the way that mayors and governors were able to still go to Cabo San Lucas, where they told their residents they had to lock down. Right, there was the confiscation of private property, the total abuse of civil rights. You can't go to church on Sunday. Why? Because of COVID. And so COVID is a great analogy of how when the state wants control, they will use whatever pretext. And in COVID, they used public health. But the Greens have been using, the environment. And heck, just look right now on social media because of the fires. The East Coast is experiencing the smoke from the Canadian fires. And what is everyone saying? AOC, Pete Buttigieg, all of them are saying it's all climate change, and this is what we have to do to fix it. And what we have to do is steal your property and trample on your civil liberties.
You are so right about this. It's like as soon as you saw the pictures from New York City and the skyline in New York City being affected by these Canadian wildfires, the first thing that I thought is how is the radical left going to leverage this to push the climate agenda even further? And like within 20 minutes of me thinking that, you had Justin Trudeau out there on Twitter, the Canadian Prime Minister, talking about how these fires were caused by climate change. And you had all these radical Greens in this country talking about, these fires are caused by climate change. And in order to fix that, we need to completely dismantle the fossil fuel industry. Never mind the fact if we did something like that, millions and millions of people would starve worldwide. But if that's their ultimate goal, and I'm sorry, and I don't mean to sound like a crazy person here, but radical green movement has talked about the earth being overpopulated. So in a weird way, like all of their strategic goals here with regards to the climate agenda and dismantling the fossil fuel industry and preferring instead to leverage, wind and solar, which is highly unreliable, will lead to poorer people becoming more poor and hurt their ability to feed their families. And in places in developing nations like Africa, people will die. Yeah. People will starve.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they're totally fine with that. The fires in Canada, and it's coincidental that's happening while we're able to talk to you because it's a real time example. The fires in Canada, that is nature. When people are like, this is climate change, it's like, no, that's what the world does. There's this notion that the world is this one, like the earth is this peaceful, harmonious, kind environment, and humans are ruining it. And then, quite frankly, it's the opposite. When you leave forests unattended, for decades because the Greens, like they've done in America, the Greens have made logging impossible. They've made forest management impossible. Don't touch the forests, right? Climate, respect the earth. You can't do any forest management. Well, when you leave a forest unattended for decades, this is what happens, and it's what happened in Australia 2 years ago. It's what happens in California regularly. It's interesting where this doesn't happen, and I'm not advocating for this because I believe in private property. But where this doesn't happen is the vestiges of the feudal system in Europe. Because if you're the Duke of Suffolk and you have 40,000 acres, it's your land, and you cultivate and protect your land. And they don't have these crazy forest fires in Germany and other places because the land is not open to the public. The land is still held by a couple of families. But as a result, they don't have this phenomena. So it's so fascinating when people like Justin Trudeau, or here in America, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, when they say, we're not allowed to do anything in the forests because we're going to respect them because of climate change. And then when neglected forests burn, they say, well, it's climate change, right? That's so much easier than saying forest management because, who runs for office to do forest management? It's boring, right? It's not like trans issues, right? Yeah. Which are sexy and fun. No one wants to manage forests. It's boring. So you ignore them, and this is the result.
Daniel, you're so right, and you're so articulate about this stuff. How did we get here? Because it seems like the radical Greens, they operate with impunity. Yeah. Many of these nonprofits that they're a part of are funded by our geopolitical adversaries like China and Russia, who want to fill the void of American energy exports. And I saw you say something on Twitter, and not to shotgun blast you with 100 different questions all nested within my comments, but you were so right about your analysis of Ukraine. And like, if you have a Ukrainian flag in your bio and you are not advocating for American energy independence and drill baby drill, then you're a complete moron. Because, the sanctions on Russia clearly aren't effective, but the best way we could cripple their economy is by shipping natural gas all over the world to dismantle that pillar of their economy and make it hard for them to wage war on Ukraine. It's why. So I guess my question is twofold. One, how did we get here? And two, why the hell aren't these massive oil and gas corporations pushing back harder against this agenda? They have the means to do it. So why don't they?
Yeah, I think the first part of your question, how did we get here, is why I agree with you that this is a movement rooted in communism, because the communists see everything and they want it. Right? They've never created anything. They just take over what other people have built, whether it's a country, whether it's a university. The fossil fuel industry, the resource development industry, because I would include mining in that, right? And metallurgic and metals and mineral mining, et cetera. The resource development, the extraction industry is the largest, most powerful industry that is still in private hands. And if you are a true statist, if you believe the state should control everything, the way Obama believed the state should run the healthcare industry, if you are a true statist, you cannot rest until that is controlled by the government. And that's why every single dictator, when they come to power, one of the first things they do is they nationalize the energy industry. Hugo Chavez did it in 2000 in Venezuela. Stalin did it. Hitler did it, right? They cannot allow such a very important industry to be in private hands. And so AOC, Bernie Sanders, Sheldon Whitehouse, these are true statists. So how do we get here? It's that they will never rest until they control this industry. And how do these groups not fight back enough? It's why I started Power the Future. It's my biggest frustration. I think for too long, the industry thought, we're kind of like the oxygen industry. Like, you can bash us, but ultimately you need us to survive. And I use the Churchill metaphor all the time about appeasing the alligator, right? You've just hoped that if you feed it,
Daniel, that's what I was thinking about as you're talking about this. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's exactly the quote that I was thinking about as you were talking. These, it feels like a lot of these major companies just rested on their laurels and say, "Hey, you need us, so there's nothing you can do to stop us." But in the meantime, as relentless as the left has been and the state has been, now I'm seeing, ExxonMobil and BP, some of these massive energy conglomerates, sort of spewing the talking points of the radical left's agenda, thinking that it will save them in the end, but it won't.
Yeah. No, it won't. And look at what's happened in just 2 years when Biden has implemented his agenda. We talked briefly about Ukraine. As he declared his war on fossil fuels and said, very proudly, no more drilling, no new oil, no new leases. And he has really, lived up to that to a certain extent. There have been a couple exceptions, but he's really lived up to that. We've seen inflation go through the roof. Of course, they've tried to blame this Ukraine war and supply chain issues, but ultimately inflation, the price of all goods and services is high because the price of energy is high. We've seen our utility bills go up 30%, and that's been a huge problem. We've enriched Russia so much so that when they had a year and a half of high prices, Putin took his wealth and he threw it towards the army and he invaded Ukraine, right? We've made the Saudis the world oil kings again. So now they're deciding, we're going to cut supply a million barrels a day starting in July because they don't care about what America says. They're not worried about America. So you look at all of these things that are happening and you say this is all the result of Biden saying we don't want to support the fossil fuel industry. And that's so again another example of how this is the communist movement in a nutshell, just with a new face. If you could resurrect from the depths of hell someone like Chairman Mao and ask him about starving 100 million people for his great leap forward, he'd still tell you it was good and necessary. Right? Like ultimately it was good and Stalin would do the same thing. And so Biden looks at the suffering he's inflicted on the American people and he says, yeah, but it's a good thing, right? It's okay. Remember, for how long have people like the Obama administration talked about European style pricing of oil and gas? Like this is what they want. And you have to wonder, why do you hate humanity so much? And then you realize, well, they're communists and communists have always hated humanity.
Yeah, it's so interesting because if you truly cared about the environment and having a responsible energy policy, then you would embrace the market-based innovation. Like I'm from Western Pennsylvania, like we've got Marcellus Shale here, like what we've been able to do here in this state, reduce our carbon emissions every year for the last 20 years to a standard that's better than what's set forth in even the Paris Climate Accords. And oh, by the way, like when you look at even just like when President Trump was in office, I mean, gas was like $1.82 a gallon, and in some places it was cheaper. Our enemies like Russia, like their economy is completely crippled. The Saudis were actually taking our calls because we were a power broker, in the actual energy industry, and they respected us more. And what I can't wrap my mind around is that, well, like if you look at it through the lens of, the radical green movement is communism just with a different name, like none of the science backs up any of the things that they're saying. I mean, these crazy greens have been like making one wild climate predicament after the next for like the last 50 years. And first it was global cooling, and then it was global warming. And since like those two things didn't come to fruition, now it's climate change. Like there's a history of them being wrong, and but how do they get away with continuing to foist this propaganda on the American people? Is that just because, and like, why do these media companies allow it to happen? I mean, I just can't understand, unless the end game is communism and that's it, like how none of the science backs up the things that they're saying.
No, it's why they have to believe in science, right? Science requires an act of faith when you're a leftist because it's not based in actual science, right? So they'll tell you about the consensus. Well, there's nothing more unscientific than consensus. That's politics. That's democracy and voting. We don't have consensus about the molecules that make up water. We have fact. And so they tell you to believe in science. And again, let's go back to the COVID world when you said, okay, well, I have to stand 6 feet apart from these people, in the jet bridge, but then when I sit down, I'm going to be shoulder to shoulder with them for 3 hours. So why do I have to stand 6 feet apart right now? And if you ask that, they would kick you off the plane, and you were on the no-fly list, and you'd say, well, this is the result of believing in science. Why does the media go along with it? Look at the Associated Press. Very proudly got an $8 million grant to cover climate stories. Now, I've asked them if I could give them an $8,001 grant to cover fossil fuel stories. They don't return my calls, but they took an $8 million grant for the sole purpose of pushing climate stories. So our enemies are very, very good at pushing propaganda, and they do, right? The curriculum is pushed by the left. It's the in vogue thing to do right now is to be a climate leftist and to applaud each other. But yeah, there is no scientific. And here's just a simple example of it. We need to get rid of fossil fuels. We need to go to wind and solar. Great. Well, wind and solar are made from fossil fuels. So actually, you use more fossil fuels to create wind and solar to make electricity than if you just burned those fossil fuels directly to make electricity. So where's the scientific benefit? Where's the savings? And if you ask that to them, they say, well, you're just a climate denier. And it's like, okay, so we're in tautology world. And it's just absolute nonsense. So ultimately it comes down to, political agendas. Either you are vested in the wind and solar industry, which a lot of these groups are. Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, has millions of dollars in stock in green energy companies, as does Pete Buttigieg, as does most of the Biden administration. Right? So you're either financially vested in this, or you just have this personal statist belief. Like I said, Bernie Sanders, the AOCs, the true believers of communism, who are admittedly socialists. You just true in your heart believe the government needs to be in charge of this. They don't have faith in humanity, in private property, in free markets, and so that's why they are relentless in their fight.
What I keep coming back to is that if they are successful in their mission, Daniel, it effectively wipes out freedom as we know it, as we've become accustomed to in this country for the last 200 plus years. I mean, if they're successful in removing natural gas stoves, and we go to all electric and all electric cars, and maybe electricity is now heating your home because you don't have natural gas being pumped into your home to heat your home, well, all the government has to do is flip a switch to turn off people's power, their ability to cook, their ability to drive, anytime that they step out of line. So just like to your point about, hey, you can't question why on an airplane, you can't question COVID on an airplane and how the policy doesn't make sense because you get kicked off the airplane and be added to the no-fly list. It's almost much in the same way. The government can control everything that you do, that you say. They don't like your social media posts, so you're not going to be able to start your oven for a week. I mean, it seems like this is a precursor to a Chinese social credit system.
It is, and that's so. You've raised so many great points, but let's go with the last one, which was China. The environmental left, our members of Congress on the left, will tell you all the time that China is leading the world with electric vehicles, and they are. More electric vehicles by far, not just because they have a larger population, but the vast majority of electric vehicle per capita sales and use is in China. Why? Well, there's two very, very clear reasons. One, China does not have a domestic oil supply. So China is smart enough to say, if I need to import 20 million barrels a day, mostly from the United States and they buy a lot from Russia, but they buy it from the world oil markets, that's a huge vulnerability because they could cut us off. So we need to put our people in electric vehicles. And secondly, the electric vehicles is the social credit system. So if you are acting poorly, if you have done something wrong, they can shut it down. So much so, and let's not knock Elon too much because I like what he's doing on Twitter, but Elon Musk, famous little story, did have a tiff with a Tesla employee who kept posting YouTube videos about Tesla. He asked them to stop. The Tesla employee said, this is my private time and my private use, and I'm going to continue to do it. And Elon finally turned off his Tesla. And the guy said, I went that morning and tried to get in, and the machine didn't work. And then you realize the fine print. When you buy the machine, yes, you buy the $60,000, that machinery is yours, but the technology, the software is always Tesla's. Just the way YouTube can kick you out of your account and Facebook can shut you down, Tesla can shut you down. And that guy was shut out of his Tesla. He had a $60,000 piece of metal sculpture in his driveway. And you say, well, the fossil fuel industry can't necessarily do that, right? I mean, gas cars are, one, we don't have to worry about the electric grid, and two, we don't have to worry about getting shut out of our system. So there's an autonomy in that that is thoroughly American, thoroughly beautiful, that the autonomy of the fossil fuel car. But now you kind of see why the statists love electric vehicles, because you're not reliant on the fossil fuel industry, which is in the private hands. You're relying on government because our electric grid comes from the government. And you know what? If Sean Parnell is acting up and we don't like the things he's saying, maybe he doesn't get to drive his car that day. Maybe his electricity was turned off for 24 hours until he deletes that tweet. And that is a very scary prospect, but that's genuinely happening.
Well, and they did it during COVID, like you said. Like, if you looked at some of the people out in California that maybe like bucked the system and said, you know what, I don't believe any of this crap. I'm a free American. I'm gonna have people over to my house, or I'm gonna allow my kids to play outside. You saw the government in California turning off water and turning off electric at homes that didn't comply. And when you look at, you can't, you're not supposed to even talk about this stuff, but if you look at how the Democrats desire control and how they pervert and corrupt every institution, if they controlled, the energy sector completely and the oil and gas industry completely, they would 100% weaponize it. Like, look at, even in Democrat primaries, Democrats essentially rig their own primaries through a superdelegate system. Everything to them is about control. And it seems like this is why this discussion, Daniel, is so important to me, because I think it's the last frontier. It's one of the last few remaining battles that we have to win, because being energy independent and embracing fossil fuels. Frankly, all of the above energy strategy would work for me, but let's not pursue green energy at the expense of oil, natural gas, and even in some places coal. Because if you drive through Western Pennsylvania and you actually care about the people of this state, and by the way, many of whom are, blue collar union Democrats that come from a blue collar union Democrat family. And in fact, there's a tweet that's pinned to your profile right now on your Twitter that shows one of those dilapidated towns that blew away after the coal industry was decimated in their area. Drive 20 minutes through Western Pennsylvania in the country, and you'll see 5 or 6 towns just like that. The things that the radical left are doing hurt people. And the energy policy they're pursuing, and then look no further than to California, Daniel, where they have rolling blackouts in the summer. And now they're talking about, I think I read a headline the other day about how we might have blackouts in certain areas of the country throughout the summer because they're over-reliant on windmills and solar. It's all of this is just so crazy to me that people buy into this at all.
And the ones who suffer the most when these blackouts happen are the very people the left claims to care about. In 2021, New York was having a heat wave in the middle of August. The electric grid couldn't compete. They have to make the human decision of shutting off certain areas of the grid to protect its overall integrity. And what neighborhoods did they shut off? They shut off poor, predominantly black neighborhoods in Brooklyn. The Upper West Side was fine. The Upper East Side, Soho, Tribeca, the cool neighborhoods, no one talks about that. When Gavin Newsom does this in California regularly, you never hear a Kardashian say how they lost power, right? You never hear Silicon Valley talk about how their grid was shut off. It's nameless, powerless, voiceless people who always suffer. And to show this is true bipartisan stupidity, because it is, Texas is almost leading the charge when it comes to wind. Texas Republicans have bought into the lie that wind power works just as well as fossil fuels. They've shut down a tremendous amount of coal plants, and they've put up hundreds of thousands of acres of wind turbines. But when they had those terrible winter storms in 2021, the wind turbines all were shut down because that's what happens in the freezing rain. And close to 700 people froze to death in their homes that night. And they weren't 700 politicians' kids, right? They weren't 700 famous, cool Austin hipsters who have, organic yogurt bars, right? They were 700 powerless, voiceless, nameless people. And we all say, oh, that's too bad. Wow, that's tragic. 700 people died. But 700 people died because Republicans in Texas shut down reliable coal, reliable natural gas, because the government threw hundreds of millions of dollars at them for wind turbines. And I got to tell you, Sean, if Republicans in Texas, the fossil fuel capital of the world, if Republicans in Texas will buy into the green lies, then all of America is absolutely doomed, because wind does not work, solar does not work, and we can get into that conversation as well, but they don't. And anyone who tries to pretend they do is talking politics. They're not talking engineering, science, hydrocarbons, etc. So it's the failures of these systems, the pain it inflicts on people is tremendous, and we're all supposed to just pretend that it's not happening. Again, likening it to COVID. The damage we inflicted on millions of people, children who still can't speak and read and write properly, but we're not supposed to talk about that because there was the greater good that the state wanted, and that's all we should focus on.
God, man, Daniel, you're so good at this, and I meet very few people that can articulate themselves like you, and not just that, and understand the actual industry. And if you I come from an energy family. You know, my father worked in nuclear energy for the Navy and helped build reactors on aircraft carriers and on our nuclear submarines. And he talked all the time growing up about that and the importance of energy. And you know, we saw coal-fired power plants in the state of Pennsylvania. You know, we saw them, rather than go out of business, innovate and transition their plants to be able to produce natural gas, and they were wildly successful doing it. And I'm so glad that you talked about I mean, there are so many different components to why American energy dominance is so important, but how it disproportionately affects lower income families is so important, and it's not talked about enough. You talked about just like the government shutting off power to poor neighborhoods when the grid can't tolerate it. But it's like, if you are spending more to fill up your car with gasoline, and companies are spending more, you know, to ship commodities to grocery stores, all of that costs more. Who does that affect the most? I mean, when when it costs $1,500 a month to heat your home, because you've got all electric heat, and you're making $2,000 a month maybe as someone who's a lower income single mom who's trying to provide for her kids, it doesn't affect the multimillionaires. They live their life, with no impact whatsoever. But it affects the very people in the towns that they shut down in the first place. And the left's response is, you know what? Those coal miners, who, by the way, like people who've been working in the energy industry, and I know that you know this, these are legacy type jobs. I mean, a lot of these coal miners were coal miners because their father and grandfather were coal miners before them. It's just what they do. And then the left just turns around and says,
especially in your region of the world, especially in your part of the world, it's legacy families.
Absolutely. And I'm sick and tired of the left pretending to represent these lower income families. And they're the ones that are hurting them the most in the first place. And Daniel, I got to ask you, where do you come from, and how did you get into all of this? You've got a story.
I'm from New York City originally. I'm from New York City originally. I've been in the DC world for 2 decades, doing your standard DC political stuff, from campaigns to PR to et cetera, and around 5 years ago, when I started this organization, these battles were really bothering me. The lies of the environmental left, and really more than anything else, the damage that it was doing to rural communities. And I also then, moved out to rural Virginia. I started my sheep farm. So I started to identify a little more with rural values than urban values. But I got so tired of the lies the environmental left told, not just about climate change, but the lies they told about the fossil fuel industry and the disdain that they had for them. I remember one of my tipping points was when I saw Michael Bloomberg with Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, I believe, and they were at some Bilderberg conference, wearing goat heads and sacrificing animals, whatever they do with those weird conferences. And he was talking about the coal industry in particular. And he said something that I'll never forget. And your wonderful audience can find it on YouTube. He said, we can find something else for them to do. But he talked about how their jobs have to end. And I thought, boy, there's so much to unpack there. Like the cool ones on stage, the powerful, rich ones, we can find something else, right? Because it's I don't care that this is their legacy, their culture, their their love for their dignity. It's like, no, I just find something else. Learn to code, right? That's basically it. This disdain they have for rural values. And so I felt like I had to jump in the fray. And just the way you've run for office and you're jumping in the fray with what you do, I felt like I couldn't be a sideliner. And so I wanted to start an organization that I didn't have to be tethered by donors and shareholders and members. You know, the huge trade associations in D.C., a lot of times, and I'll even cut ExxonMobil and BP some slack here. A lot of times their corporate comms and VP of compliance people say, you know what, if we just shut up and write $1 million check, they're not going to throw any more bricks through our window. So let's just do that. And it's the wrong idea, but I can understand it. I can understand that you don't want to deal with this, try to buy them off, but you can't buy off the communists, right? And so I wanted to start an organization that I could say the things that needed to be said without fear of being canceled, without fear of being told, hey, whoa, you really can't say that. Because I do believe we're fighting the forces of evil. The fossil fuel industry has made life better, right? Just like I was saying that, you know, those fires are what happens in nature. Unless you control nature, what happens in the world is an awful place. Being alive is terrible, but fossil fuels have given us medicines and air conditioning and movement and cultivation of food and rubber and plastic. I'm wearing contact lenses and this microphone, and the fossil fuel industry and the economy it built has given us dignity, and life expectancy has grown, and we're not dying of dysentery at 22 like people did not very long ago. And so I don't see this industry as something that is bad for the earth. I see it as something that is wonderful for humanity, and the earth is adapting absolutely fine. And it needed some defenders, and so I jumped in the fray to defend, because they are relentless, and if we don't defeat them, they're never going to stop. And you know, D-Day was a couple of weeks ago. John Kerry likened D-Day to our battle for climate change. I liken D-Day to my battle against communists like John Kerry. They're the ones who are destroying humanity, and they need to be stopped.
Man, you're getting me fired up, man. I completely agree. And, you know, first of all, I love it. I love what you're doing. You know, it's incredible. And I just think, like, part of the problem, I think you spoke directly to part of the problem. And what I'd like to see happen are a lot of these oil and gas companies, I feel like, especially the big titans, they should be investing in, you know, the cities, inner cities, or trade schools where we can educate our youth about everything that you just said. Because the reality is what I noticed very clearly, a lot of these young kids, many of whom are conservative, they're brought up through school to be taught that fossil fuels are going to run out, or that they're somehow bad, or they just have like an association, fossil fuels bad. We've got to change that. And you know, there's a company that's right here at Deepwell. It's an amazing company. It's a small oil and gas company headquartered here in Zelienople. They helped me sponsor this podcast. But they, you know, if you were able to go into the inner city and say to kids, like, listen, you come out, you don't even have to go to college, and you know, talk to parents. Hey, if you don't want your kid indoctrinated in college, because that's what's going to happen, you know, they can go work at a small company like Deepwell and in their first year make $50,000 a year. And then after 5 years, make $250,000. It's tough work, but it gives people the sense of upward mobility. And why? I guess what I'm building to is, why can't we invest in programs like that go out to the community engagement, and try to educate people on why fossil fuels are so important, and why, if we want to continue to be free and live exceptional lives, why don't we invest more in an educational proponent?
Yeah, and we do this at the state level. I'm the head of this organization, but our most effective work is at the state level. I would love to have someone in Pennsylvania one day this is their whole mission, is outreach to the people of Pennsylvania. 500,000 people work in oil and gas and coal in Pennsylvania, and you got to figure those 500,000 people. A lot of them are guys, a lot of them are married, a lot of them have brothers and moms and dads. So when you add all those people together, I mean, and you've run campaigns and you know how to do this type of, like digital outreach. When you add all those numbers together, you're talking about a really large group of people that you need to vote as a bloc and that you need to advocate as a bloc and say, we're not going to lose these important jobs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because our legislature wants to jump in bed with the Greens. So I'd love to have someone in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but this is what we're trying to do, is absolutely outreach at the local level. The Biden administration right now is talking a lot about environmental justice, and they're targeting the inner city community. What's the most racist thing you could do than force these folks into higher electric bills, less reliable grids, right? Like how much more less dignity are we going to afford these people by convincing them that, if you trust the government, we'll protect you from the big bad fossil fuel industry, whereas the only way a lot of those communities rise out of poverty is through starting a small business. But you can't start a small business if you can't afford the electricity. You can't start a small business if you can't afford to ship your goods and services, and all of that requires inexpensive energy. And it's why in 2019 we had the best economy on record, because oil, you said gas was under $2 a gallon. Nationally it was. Oil was at $50 a barrel. It's now $35 cheaper, more expensive now, or $30 more. And since energy was so inexpensive, you had surplus cash to buy things, to travel. It was the record year for hotels, record years for retail, record year for restaurant associations. Why? Because life was cheap. And Americans, they don't save enough, I'll give them that, but when they have cash, they spend it. But no one has cash right now because you're paying 30% more for your electricity, and it's just going to get higher and higher and higher and higher. And when people say, well, are we going to be bankrupt? America going to be destroyed? No. But we're going to have the roaring economy of Spain. And I don't want to be Spain. And people are like, don't knock on Spain. That is a knock on Spain. I don't want to be a mediocre quasi-socialist nation where the vast majority of our 35-year-old men are sitting at a coffee shop debating soccer, right? And that is the European mentality. And that's why Americans, they go and they scratch their head and they're like, does anyone here work? Like, how are you all just sitting at a cafe at noon on a Tuesday? Because the state gives them a ton of money and they have a laziness, a complacency, and they're insignificant on the world stage. And that's not America. We've never been an insignificant country. And that's what we will lose. And we will lose it to China, who will be the world's dominant. They're already winning our cultural wars, right? Disney can't make a movie without kissing Xi Jinping's rear end, right? They're winning our athletic wars. Heck, the Saudis are winning our golf wars, so we're already losing some of our cultural things. Why? Because the Saudis are out buying us with their oil money, and the Chinese are out buying us because we're buying all their stupid, ineffective wind and solar panels. And so we're making our adversaries, our enemies, replace us. It's mind-boggling.
Wow. I mean, Daniel, to your point, and then I'll let you go. But if the people that are listening that are watching in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, if you think that these increasing costs aren't going to affect you, well, the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, like unilaterally imposed by then Governor Wolf and then now Governor Shapiro. People are saying that that's going to increase costs, your electric bills, 36%. And that is significant. It's oppressive, and this is the future that they want for you all. And Daniel, so you got to tell me what can we do? And I'll tell you, anytime you need anything from me, anytime you want to come on this show or you need my support, I don't care what it takes. Like, I'm completely 100% on board with your mission. There in the trenches with you, whatever I can do. But how can other people help you, and where can they find you?
You can email me, Daniel@powerofthefuture.com. You can follow me on social, or just go to powerofthefuture.com. You can ask me questions. You can invite me to speaking opportunities. I'm in Wyoming right now because I'm speaking at the Wyoming Coal Mining Association. I'd love to speak to younger people more and do really hard Q&A on climate issues. Ask me your tough questions because I think I can answer them in a fun and friendly way. If you want to do some, I mean, I'd go to Pennsylvania in a heartbeat to do a live event with you with any of your followers. When you emailed me and asked me or DM'd me, my gut reaction, I was excited, like when Greg Brady met John Drysdale, and I was like total fanboy. But then I was like, actually, like, no, I was more like when Marsha Brady met Davy Jones. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I got an email from Sean Parnell. So I was very excited.
Why all the Brady Bunch references? Where did the
Brady Bunch? I'm not that old, but I'm the youngest of a big family, and all my older siblings watched it when I was a kid. So I watched the reruns, and I was a huge Brady Bunch fan. So I mean, anything to do with talking to folks about these issues, anything to do with you, I would welcome the opportunity because they're so important to our economy, our dignity as humans, our well-being, our prosperity, and American greatness. I mean, they're all tied together, and world peace. They're all tied together because of American energy, and that's why we have to fight for it. And I am just thrilled to be on camera with you. I've been a big fan for a long time, so really, it's very cool to sit across from you.
Well, hey, believe me, the feeling is mutual. You used to go on Tim Pool, right, and talk about this stuff on Timcast. Did you ever go on that show?
Sure, been on Tim a lot. Yep.
Yeah. So like way back in the day. Yeah, when I used to do his show, he's like, I got to get you on with Daniel Turner. I got to get you on with him. And I'm like, I love that guy. I would love to do it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make it work, but I would love to continue to fight this fight with you, man. And so anytime you want to come up to Pennsylvania and do an event or anything like that, I'm completely in. So
thank you. I appreciate
God
that.
bless you, man.
And we need voices like yours, and that's why you're the threat against democracy. It's why they go after you so hard, because when you start, and if it was not energy, if it was the trans issue, if it's not the trans issue, it's the COVID issue, whatever it is, not the prevailing narrative, the voices that try to just ask thoughtful and engaging questions and make people think for themselves and show them what's at risk. You're the threat to democracy. They have to come after you. They have to try to destroy you, and that's why we need to stand together. And I will stand by your side anytime, Sean.
Yeah, likewise, man. I feel the same way. And Daniel Turner, everybody, thank you for coming on the show. And anytime you want to come back, you just let me know. Thanks, brother.
Thank you. It means a lot. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Daniel. All right, everybody. That is Daniel Turner, the CEO of Power the Future. He's a pretty incredible guy. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Dude is ridiculously smart. While you're at it, be sure to go and subscribe and listen to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to my Rumble or YouTube channel where you can watch the actual episode live. There'll be lots of future and exclusive content there. Super excited about that. And also, I just wanted to say thank you. Battleground Podcast on Instagram just crossed over 70,000 followers on my page. We primarily promote the podcast there and drive traffic to Rumble, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts from my Instagram page. So excited about that. And that's a big deal for me because we started out at the beginning of the year with about 38,000 followers on Instagram. Now we're up over 73,000, I think. Absolutely crazy. It's a true testament to you and your support, and I am endlessly grateful for it. Don't forget to check out officialseanparnell.com. Again, you see this t-shirt that I'm wearing right now? This is the Battleground crest right here. We're rolling out a lot of cool apparel over the next year. We've got 2 t-shirts on there right now. I think you'll really dig them. And we're rolling out a bunch of designs for women as well. So stay tuned. Lots of exciting stuff. But none of it's possible without you. As always, thank you for watching this show. Never quit, never surrender. God bless you all, and God bless this amazing country that we live in. Take care.